genius? Okay, I think it's working. If not, I'm talking to myself, and that's fine. I'm in my little corner with new pajamas. Thanks, Maddie. Getting cozy. Okay, put my phone on airplane mode so nobody can distract us. My boyfriend's in the living room, and I'm making him sit out there because I'm awkward. Hi, Matt. I hope you had a good week. How was it? My cat's gonna join us. Where is she? There she is. Yay. Hi, Thomas. Okay. It's me getting cozy. You're getting cozy. We're all getting cozy together. Okay. Thanks for popping back in, everybody that I love so much. Okay, so today I feel really awkward because I feel like Matt can hear me from the living room, so I'm just like, talk quieter. But also don't, because people need to, I have so many fuzzies on my thing. Sorry, I'm like all over the place. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about step 1 and do a little bit of like, what is AA, what's the fucking point, and kind of do like a little bit of history and then a little bit of step 1, because step 1's pretty short, and then I figure with step 2 do like, well, who the fuck founded it, and then what was step 2 like, kind of like that. So today is step 1, and then also like some of the literature you use for it, so you're gonna get educated a little bit. And it was a really good refresher for me because it's been so long since step 1, and I've done the steps multiple times, but step 1 was so long ago, so this was a really good refresher for me. Also, hi Caleb, hi Summer. Okay, hey, that is Kelly. I remembered your username. If it's not Kelly, this is very awkward, and please ignore that comment. Thank you. Okay, so the 2 most important books in AA. This one, obviously, mine has been very heavily used, lots of bookmarks and shit tabbed in it. This is the basic Alcoholics Anonymous book, and I'll go over what's in it. This is called the 12 by 12. I ripped the cover off because I didn't like it. And what this does is essentially dives into the 12 steps and the 12 traditions of AA in more detail. And it even gives you a nice little bit on, this is what we call the big book. So this gives you a little bit of information on what the big book is. And actually the Bible is not part of AA literature. There is a religious component, but the Bible is not part of it because AA does not, it doesn't associate itself with any religion. It talks about a higher power, but it doesn't relate to Christianity or any other religions. So it doesn't use the Bible, it doesn't use any religious texts. I've heard people talk about all kinds of religions in the rooms. So no official religious texts. This is basically our Bible, the big book. And then this is our 12 by 12 that breaks down the 12 steps and traditions. And I wanted to read a little excerpt that basically breaks down what is in this giant book. And I thought 12 and 12 worded it really nicely. I won't read you the whole thing because we're not in reading time in kindergarten. Also, these books are on Amazon and they're super cheap. I think it's like $20 for both of them. I don't really know. I buy mine at meetings and they're usually pretty cheap, and I've had them gifted to me before, so I've bought them for people that I've sponsored. I've had sponsors buy them for me. This is the one I've had since the very beginning, and this is the one I've also had since the very beginning. And I don't like multiple copies of books, so anytime I get multiples, I give them away because I'm OCD and I like to write in all my shit. You can't really tell in the foreword, but like lots of highlighting and scribbles take place. Okay, so the big book. So basically it talks about, so in it, alcoholism's described from the alcoholic's point of view. The spiritual ideas of the society were codified, which means just put into steps, for the first time in the 12 steps, and the applications of these steps to the alcoholic's dilemma was made clear. So basically it outlines what the 12 steps are, how it's been applied, and then the remainder of the book is devoted to 30 stories or case histories in which the alcoholics describe their drinking experiences and recoveries. And that basically is to help alcoholics from all walks of life identify as an alcoholic. And the stories in the back, I haven't read them all, but there are a couple from, and they're all anonymous. They just use their first names. And I won't be using names of anybody I know just to protect their privacy. But the stories in the back, there's people who work in the medical profession, there's lawyers, there's doctors, and then there's just everyday normal people. There's teenagers, older people, people from all walks of life. So basically, this book, it's the basic text of the fellowship. That's what they call it. It's like the fellowship of the alcoholics, and it's like a nod to Lord of the Rings, which I like. I don't know if that was intentional, but I like to think it was. The book Alcoholics Anonymous became the basic text, presents volume proposes to broaden deeper the understanding of the 12 steps, basically is what it is. And I think it's done a great job of doing that. I've read the first 160 something pages, which outlines, I think it's 164 pages. It is. I nailed it. The first 164 pages outlines the 12 steps and what it means to your life. And I think my favorite part about the big book is that it starts with a medical doctor's opinion on it, and it's called The Doctor's Opinion because they are not original. And so it's written by Dr. William D. Silksworth, and a little bit of background on him. I had to Google him because I couldn't remember exactly where he worked, but he was a director of Charles B. Towns Hospital for drug and alcohol addictions in New York Center, and I think he worked there in the 1930s. And he is considered a co-founder of AA with Bill Wilson, who we'll talk about another time. But basically, Bill Wilson was the alcoholic. He'd been treated like 3-4 times for alcoholism, met this doctor, Dr. Silkworth, and they kind of partnered up because Bill Wilson was struggling with the moral part of alcoholism, and Dr. Silkworth, who I don't think was an alcoholic, was like, hey, there's actually a pathological disease-like nature to alcoholism. So he was the one that put a medical basis to alcoholism and provided that. So it helped Bill build AA, essentially, and move it from this, like, moral travesty, like you're an awful person, to, oh, this is a disease that I can deal with and overcome. And so how many did he? So he treated more than 40,000 alcoholics in his life, and he died in 1951. And basically, in his doctor's opinion, they asked him to write this letter and give his official medical opinion on AA. And I'm not going to read it because it's very long. So, people in the 30s write ridiculously long letters. They had nothing else to do. But he essentially wrote that emotions don't work. It's not about morals. You're not a bad person. It's a disease. It's not a question of character. So I really appreciate that about him, and me coming from a scientific, wanting to go in the medical field, to hear a doctor from the 1930s write this out, and then to see people in the drug and counseling world today, or drug and addiction world today, continue to back up his writing. It's very validating, and it makes me feel a lot better, like, okay, this is a disease. It's not, oh, I'm just a shitty person. And there is something I can do about it. And in his doctor's opinion, he writes about 4 types of alcoholics that I thought was laid out really nicely. And just be forewarned, everything read from the book, it's a lot of he, it's a very male-dominated world back then. Not much has changed. But he writes about, like, the type of man who's unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand environment. That's type 1, the denier. And then there's a type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. Another type of denier. There's the manic depressive, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be typed or could be written. Then there are types entirely normal in every respect, except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. I'm a combo of like 3 and 4. So he lays that out really nicely, and then he shares the story. I think he shares a story of 1 or 2 patients, and he basically talks about how, like, I thought this was a question of character, and then I had this patient, and here's what happened, and I watched him go through this journey. I watched him go through AA, and goddamn, his life changed. And so he writes from a medical perspective, his observations. And at the end of his letter, he writes, I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through, and though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray. Which, I liked his little, like, yeah, come to laugh at it, bitch, but, like, you're gonna stay and you're gonna enjoy it. So I like the little snarky doctor senses of humor. And also when they say come to pray, again, they're probably operating from a Christian mindset, but it is not religious by any means. Like, I've never been, like, yes, churches host a lot of AA meetings, but they're not affiliated with the churches. Like, AA groups don't donate to churches that I know of. Like, there's no churchy things. There's no, like, religious, it's not what movies portray it to be. Yes, it's held in a church because rent is cheap and we're practical. Like, it's not because we're Christian and we love Jesus. A lot of people do, and that's fine, but no one will force it on you, which is great. Okay, so that's a little bit about the big book. And again, very, very brief. I'm not a professional. These are just my opinions and things I've learned in AA. And there are people across AA that might disagree with me. Whatevs. Okay, so what are the 12 steps? Basically, and the 12 steps are basically, here is the to-do list on how to become a better person through Alcoholics Anonymous, essentially, is the easiest way. It's like a to-do list for improving your character. Yeah, that about sums it up. And basically, this is what the foreword says about it. AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which, if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink, enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. So that's their very, very simplified version of what the steps are. So I would agree with that. It's essentially a checklist of, hey, do this shit, and you'll feel better. And it also says the basic principles of AA as they are known today were borrowed mainly from the fields of religion and medicine. So religion, Bill, medicine, Dr. Silkworth, good combo. Though some ideas upon which success finally depended were the result of noting the behavior and needs of the fellowship itself. So it's basically a group of people who come together, who work together through means of medicine, trial and error, religion, higher power, spirituality, blah, 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 whatever you want to call it, to come together, and you help each other grow and improve. And AA actually started in 1935 at Akron, whatever. I don't really care. If you're from there, don't message me about how to pronounce it. I really don't care. Akron, Ohio, as an outcome of a meeting between a well-known surgeon and a New York broker. So, interesting how these two men just kind of come together, and from them stem this whole society of drunken people who lose their shit and then collectively find it together. So that's kind of cool. Okay. Sorry, I have notes on my phone for what I want to talk about because I did prep again, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks in a row. So, go me. So that's a little bit about AA, a little bit about the two main texts, and there's plenty of other texts, but these are the two main ones and most important ones that you start with. And then, that's really it. The founder, the medical dude, which in my opinion gave it medical validity. Okay, check. Cool. Okay, so step 1. And yes, you can throw questions. I'll try and answer them as I go, unless there's trolls, and then I'm just going to ignore them. Unless they're hilarious, then I'll acknowledge them. Okay, so step 1. So everything that I'm about to say is it's basically what was taught to me by multiple sponsors, kitty, and just things that I've picked up from meetings, things I've learned. So step 1, I was taught to... Kitty, seriously? Alright. Okay. Henley wanted to say hello. So step 1 was taught to me in 2 parts. So the whole step is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And that's step one. And you might hear that and go, well, what do you do there? There's no step. It's just a sentence. But Henley, could you not? She's scratching at my door right now. But basically, it was taught as a two-parter to me. The first part is you have to admit you're powerless over alcohol. And then the second part, you have to admit to yourself that your life had become unmanageable. It sounds easy, but the whole point of step one is to acknowledge the fact that I can't do this. And I'm going to need help, essentially. It's really I can't do it, is step one. And that is a lot easier said than done. It's really easy to be like, yeah, no, I can't do it. Great, okay, next. But that is not how step one works. There's a lot more to it, because it talks about how, so when I first met my sponsor, she read this part of the book to me, and I just looked at her like, and remember, I was 21 years old, had, lost everything I could overnight, but in the end, like at the end of the day, I wasn't homeless. I still had, enough friends. I lived with my family who didn't completely abandon me. Like, I still worked a job as long as I could until I had knee surgery. Like, in my mind, I had lost, like, looking back, yes, I had lost everything and that was rock bottom. But even then, laying in the hospital bed, that to me, like, I didn't acknowledge that as rock bottom at the time. It's only rock bottom now that I'm looking back. So my sponsor talked about how we're victims of a mental obsession so subtly powerful that no amount of human willpower could break it. And that was what she really wanted to drive home to me, was the fact that, hey, like, you can sit here and try to do it on your own, but you've tried that and you ended up in the hospital. You tried to stay sober after you got out of the hospital, and guess what? You had a drink in your hand 2 days later. It is subtly powerful. I thought that was a really great way of describing it. It's like, I don't know. Oh, actually, here's a really good medical comparison. We had a patient who came in one day with rib pain. Subtle pain going on for a few weeks. Didn't think anything of it. Super subtle. Didn't bother her enough to do anything about it. And then when she came in, had an x-ray, nothing was there, but it still bothered her. So a few weeks later, she came back. Again, subtle, not that big of a deal. It wasn't like crippling. But then we ordered a chest CT and she had metastatic cancer and she died 2 months later. That's probably the best comparison I can think of. It starts as something small and subtle and you don't think about it, and it doesn't have any significant impact on your life until the moment it does. Until you're diagnosed with metastatic cancer. And then you're fucking dead in 2 months. And that's kind of how alcoholism was for me. It, blacking out, doing stupid shit. But hey, I didn't die. I didn't go to jail. And it wasn't a big deal until it was. Until I was in the hospital. Until I got kicked out of college. Until all these things happened. It was just subtly sneaking up on me. And that is why you have to acknowledge the fact that you can't do it by yourself. Why? Okay, and I think that was the next part. Importance of hitting rock bottom and realizing it, admitting it. Why do you have to hit it? And I think page 24. See, I marked page numbers and everything because I'm so prepared. So why all this insistence that every AA must hit bottom first? Great question. Glad you asked. The answer is that few people will sincerely try to practice the AA program unless they've hit bottom. Because by working these steps, you are adopting an attitude and action that almost no alcoholic who is still drinking can dream of taking. You're learning to be honest and tolerant. You are learning to confess your faults, make amends for the harm you've done. You are learning that you are not God in the universe, and you are sacrificing time and energy trying to carry AA's message to the next alcoholic you meet. And it says, no, the average alcoholic, self-centered in the extreme, doesn't care for this prospect unless he has to do these things in order to stay alive himself. And you know what? That's really fucking true. Why would I want to go out of my way to do all of these things that are really fucking hard that frankly I don't see anybody else doing? And it's like, I mean, AA calls for a lot of work on yourself. And it is hard. No one says it's easy. They say your life will be better, but no one promises an easy life. It's just better, and they're right. It's fucking hard, working the steps is some of the hardest shit I ever had to do. But in the end, my life is so much better than it was. And I wouldn't change it for the world. And if I had gone into it with my ego, if I had gone into it thinking I was still in control, I could handle it, I could this, I could that, no way I would have humbled myself, to be completely honest with my sponsor, especially going through steps like 4 and 5, where you're admitting all of your faults, and steps 8 and 9, where you're making up for those faults. You don't do things like that, where you're so vulnerable, and you're so just, you're facing the ugliest demons in your closet, and you're learning to be okay with that, making peace with them. And if I had gone into it with the attitude of, I got this, or, you know what, I'm not completely out of control, my life is still pretty manageable, I wouldn't have been completely honest with my sponsor, and I probably would have held a few things back. And, when you do things like that, you're not really working the steps. You're kind of bullshitting yourself and your sponsor. You're wasting everybody's time. So that's why they really drive home the fact that you have to hit rock bottom. And you have to, it's not just hitting rock bottom, but you have to admit it and acknowledge it and accept it. You have to basically crush your ego. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. And that was very, very true, because I was very, full of myself. I don't need anybody. But the minute that, and I'll tell you how my sponsor got rid of that for me. Should I do that first? Yeah, I will, actually. Okay. No. Yeah, no, it's fine. So, my step 1, when I asked my sponsor, okay, so what do we do? How do we get rid of this ego of mine? Which was weird, because I hated myself so much, and I didn't understand how I had an ego, because I hated myself so much. I'm like, for someone with such low self-esteem, how are you telling me I have an ego? And she says, this is the best thing anyone's ever said to me. Most alcoholics see themselves as a piece of shit on a golden pedestal. I can put myself down, but don't you dare touch my pedestal. And I just thought that was the best analogy, and it was completely accurate. I thought I was a piece of shit, but goddamn, I was so high up on my pedestal. And so the way that my first sponsor, had me help me get rid of that ego, was she said, basically start from your very first drink, write it down, and then write down what happened, write down your consequences, and then do that for every time you had a drink from now, or from your first drink until your last drink. And lucky for me, I started at 14 and stopped at 21. So, there's people with 50 years, and they had to condense to decades, but for me, my sponsor said, you only have 7 years, so you get to write every single thing out. All of it. And I looked at her and said, why the fuck do you hate me so much? But I did. I did it. This was my journal, and, I did step 1. She called it evidence of my unmanageability. And, it starts out really tame, really, really tame. And then, all of a sudden, it's not so tame. It starts in, oh gosh, what year is it? There's a little bit in 2008, a little bit in 2007 that I had forgotten about, a little bit in 2009, and then 2010, a little bit in 2012, a little bit in 2013, a little bit in 2014, and then a little bit in 2015 was when it took off. And so when I started writing about 2015, I had to break it down by months, because Yeah, so this is all just July of 2015. And then August. Oh, and there's more July, because I forgot. September. Oh, this is all October. Oh, 2016. Oops, stuff is falling out. And then January, February. This is me writing about my hospital experience. Long as shit. And then a bunch of extra things. And in my mind, I'm like, this isn't even that bad. And then she looked at me and said, okay, read it all out loud to me. I sat there, and bless my sponsor, she read her list out loud to me too, so this took like hours. But bless her soul for putting up with me. But she sat there, and I read this whole thing out to her. And at first I was kind of chuckling, like, haha, these stories are kind of funny. And then we get to some of the other stories, and then we get to the hospital. We get to me trying to kill myself. We get to me scaring my friends. We get to me almost dying. And suddenly no one's laughing anymore. And, you know, it's just, after reading all of that stuff, I remember just sitting there looking at her like, wow, doesn't sound as glamorous out loud. And she said, do you believe that your life was manageable at that point? And I said, no, I guess not. And she's like, do you believe that you were in control or you had any sort of power? And after reading it out loud, I said, no, I guess not. And that, for me, was what I needed to get my ego in check, was reading all of it out loud. And, you know, there was no exaggerating, there was no embellishing the story, making it funny. It was just a bunch of shit that I had done to hurt people, and me hurting myself, me being in sketchy situations and nearly getting hurt, and just sitting there being really ashamed at the end of it. And she said, you don't have to be ashamed. You just need to admit that you were at rock bottom and your life was unmanageable and you were powerless over alcohol. And it was pretty easy to admit, maybe you're right, after reading all of this out loud. And I did talk about my hospital experience, I think in my second episode, one of the past episodes on YouTube. I'll have to put a link on my profile. But yeah, so that was my step one, and it was fucking brutal. And yeah, I sat with that for like a week and just kind of let it sit there and hit me in the face over and over. And you know what? If most people, you know, sit there and read their entire drinking history out loud, they might not be proud of it. They might, but the thing is, most people that aren't alcoholics, you might have more laughs in there. It might be more chill. You wouldn't be sitting where I am, you know? And there's a difference. It's the things that, like, I did, the things that happened. My relationship with alcohol wasn't, quote, normal. I was not a social drinker. There was no casual anything. Every time I drank, it was to black out. I don't remember any time where I drank and didn't black out. That was normal for me, and I didn't know that that wasn't, quote, normal. So that was my step one. And it was very humbling. And even I didn't even read all of it, but just glancing at it, I'm like, ugh, I can feel it. Ugh. So that was my step one. That was me kind of re-hitting rock bottom and then re-accepting it, if that makes sense. Re-accepting it and allowing that ego to start to fall away so that, you know what, I can start to make room for something else, anything else to be in charge, something else. And for me to actually start working on myself and getting to a point where I wasn't a piece of shit on a pedestal. I was just another human being that was flawed and needed to work on themselves. And basically, my sponsor described it as you bringing yourself down to the level of everybody else in the human race and accepting the fact that you're one of them. You join the human race and then you get on with your life. And that to me was such a novel concept. Because I didn't realize how far apart my alcoholism had set me from my peers until I rejoined society, if that makes sense. And if you're not an alcoholic, a lot of this won't make sense, and that's totally okay. That's why we're having these conversations, and it probably sounds weird coming out of the mouth of someone who's 26, and I, again, went through this at 21, so I'm recalling, but, you know, it's probably weird hearing me talk about this stuff, and it's really easy to dismiss the stories I tell you or dismiss my experiences because I'm young, but honestly, fuck anybody that does that. If anybody looks at you and says you're too young to know what you're talking about, you're too young to blah, 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 blah. Well, you know what, Karen? You're too old to be alive, yet here you are. So, yeah. Don't ever let somebody invalidate your experience because you're young. I'm a 26-year-old alcoholic in recovery. I've been sober for 5 years. I joined the program at 21 years old, and there have been people joining that are younger than I was. One of my friends that got sober with me, he's like 2 years younger than me, and I'm pretty sure he's still sober, and I think he's coming up on 5 years this month. I need to reach out, actually, and see if he's still sober, but we're like the same age. He's a little bit younger, so it's possible to be an alcoholic at any age. Alcoholism does not discriminate. Age, gender, whatever. You can be fucking 17 years old and be an alcoholic, and you are equally qualified to be there as a 40-year-old person that lost their marriage, home, and job, and whatever. It doesn't matter, you know? And yes, I am doing well. Thank you, person. But yeah, the point is, it doesn't matter how old you are. If some old person tells you that your experience is not valid, fuck them. You can show them the stream and tell them I said fuck them. I say fuck you fuck you to them on your behalf. There you go. But that's also a nice thing about the people I know in AA. A lot of them took me seriously, even at 21, which was really nice. A lot of people I know in AA, a lot of them, for the most part, they don't look at young people and say, oh, you're too young to understand. A lot of them say, yeah, I get it, I just experienced it 20 years later, but glad you're here early and you have your whole life ahead of you, and I'm so jealous, I wish I got it younger. That's been the attitude that I've mostly gotten. There's a few older people who are very full of themselves, but there are in any group. You just let it roll off your shoulders and whatever. So that's step one, me hitting my rock bottom. And I think what I love about the 12 and 12, about it diving into the steps in even more detail. In step one, it talks about different levels of rock bottom, which I appreciate a lot. Because when AA first started out, it was for a lot of people who were just desperate. Like, think cliche alcoholic, the homeless person, the one who's lost everything, the cliche alcoholic. The worst of the worst, if you will. And so a lot of people would read the literature and say, oh, that's not me. I didn't lose everything. And they're what we call high-functioning alcoholics, which is what I was for a while. But, you know, they had jobs. They managed their marriages. They raised kids semi-okayly. Like, they looked okay for the most part. They didn't lose everything. And so for those people, who is type 4 as described by Dr. Silkworth in Doctor's Opinion, they would read it and say, well, that's not me, so I must not have a problem, which was problematic because there were a lot of people who were alcoholics whose rock bottoms looked different. So that's why I think that's part of the reason why the 12 and 12 was written, was to include more detail. And they talk a lot, this page 22, they talk about how they had to raise the bottom, basically. The rest of us had to hit to the point where it would hit them. So basically what they're talking about is if you raise the rock bottom, or you basically make it clear that you don't have to lose everything to be an alcoholic, a lot more people were like, oh, I do have a problem. A lot more people were coming, and that's why they included the stories in the back of the big book that from people of all walks of life, so more people could identify, more people could learn. And by doing that, you encompass more people are learning, more people are participating, more people they have access to this help they need, and more importantly, more people are getting sober that need to be sober. Henley, I am on a roll and you are scratching up carpet. Can you not? Hey! Kids. It's my cat. She's my kid. Anyway, so basically, the point of the first step is to hit your rock bottom and acknowledge it and accept it. And then you move on to step 2. And the thing is, your rock bottom isn't going to look like everybody else's, and that's okay. And that's the point. That's what they want to emphasize here among all my highlights. It's your rock bottom. Like they say, basically, if you go back far enough in your drinking history, you can see years before we realized we were out of control that it was no mere habit, it was the beginning of a fatal progression. So, and then something they said was, I really enjoy their sarcasm, but they write, to the doubters we say, perhaps you're not an alcoholic after all. Why don't you try some more controlled drinking, bearing in mind, meanwhile, what we have told you about alcoholism. It was then discovered that when one alcoholic had planted in the mind of another the true nature of his disease, that person could never be the same again. That was absolutely true for me, because after my first meeting, hi Henley, after my first meeting, I remember wanting to go to the grocery store and wanting to get a drink and feeling like I absolutely could not go home until I did that. And I remembered everything they said at the meeting. I remembered everything I had learned. And I knew they were right. You know, I felt it's so hard to describe. They describe it like an allergy. It's like an allergic reaction, which, you know, it makes sense. It's not the best description, but it sort of makes sense. It was like, I remember driving home, and I ended up parking my car across the street from my parents' house, calling my dad, shaking, because I wanted to go home, but I couldn't. Like, I just couldn't. I remember my mouth was watering, and I think I was still going through withdrawal at this point, but I wanted a drink. I felt like I needed a drink, and I couldn't not. Like, I couldn't stop myself. And then everything they said that I learned at that first meeting about it being a subtle disease, it being powerful, me being powerless, and all this stuff, it just kind of came crashing down. And then I ended up going to a meeting. And then I went to another. And then I went to another. And then I went to another. And I got a sponsor and I did the work. And 5 years later, here I am. Still sober. So that's a really, really brief crash course into step 1. They have whole meetings about it where they will go like an hour into it. Yeah, they'll talk about it for an hour and a half, and just give you the lowdown. And, you know, a lot of people need that, and that's great. I'm grateful for the resources. There's plenty of resources for meetings. The AA website, I believe it's aa.org. You can literally Google Alcoholics Anonymous website, and it's like the first thing that'll pop up. And it's super easy. And basically what AA has done for me is, so they talk a lot about how alcohol is a symptom, right? It's something that, it's a symptom of the underlying disease. And once I stopped drinking, there was a lot of work that needed to be done. So AA helped me get started on that path, went into counseling, and, you know, faced my depression and anxiety head on, started taking care of myself. And that's a lot of what AA did for me, was clear that fog in my mind get sober, clear my head enough to participate in the human race. And the first thing I had to do was acknowledge the fact that I was doing a really fucked up job of life. And that's okay. I mean, it wasn't okay, but you can't change until you acknowledge that something needs to change. And nothing's gonna change if nothing changes. So I changed. Still changing, still working on it. So, yeah. So I guess resources. Look up AA. The AA.org website is fantastic. There's phone numbers. And if you look up AA meetings near me, there's a lot of resources that'll pop up. If you want to go, look for meetings that say open, because closed meetings are for people that are for sure alcoholics. They know it. Open are, open to family members. I've had family members come with me, to celebrate me getting my 1 month or my 1 year coin, my 6 month coin, stuff like that. And at your first meeting, you don't need to speak. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to introduce yourself. You don't have to do anything. No one will pressure you. No one will anything. If you get called on, you can politely say, I'm just here to listen, and that will be that. If people want to talk to you afterwards, you are free to beeline towards the door and run away. That's fine. No one's going to bother you. It's a very, you get what you put into it type of program. No one's going to force anything on you. Everyone seems to be really nice. Of course, there's douchebags. There's always douchebags. There's always creepers. There's always creepers on both genders. But for the most part, if you wanted to check out a meeting, check out Open. The websites will tell you. They usually have a phone number. I would give them a call to see if they're doing Zoom or in person. You can get a little bit more information about it. And that's really it. And I've moved. And when I studied abroad in New Zealand, that was how I found meetings. I Googled AA meetings near me, called the phone number, and got people to give me rides, which was fantastic. And then when I moved to Spokane, I did the same thing. When I went to Seattle, when I was first starting to get into it, I did it. And at the end of the meeting, I asked for a list of phone numbers for women who wanted to connect. You can do that too. So there's lots of resources. You just have to go for it. That's really the best resources. A bunch of addiction numbers you can Google, but I think, there's also NA as well, like Narcotics Anonymous. I think there's cocaine. There's one for cocaine and meth and weed specifically. AA is just the oldest. It's the one with the most history, the most results, if you will. It's the one most recognized by the medical community because it's been around the longest, but I think NA is picking up more traction as well. It's essentially the same program. The stories are a little bit different. I've been to like one NA meeting, but drugs were never my vice. It was just alcohol. I'm an alcoholic through and through. So yeah, there's lots of other options. Happy to answer more questions. Happy to find resources for you. I know sometimes, a lot of people are very like, I don't want to do the labor of research. I'm happy to do labor of research. I had plenty of people do it for me, so I'm happy to Google meetings near wherever you are too. And I think that's really all I had to say about step 1. Yeah, I hit everything that I wanted to talk about. So yeah, I still don't have a fancy outro. I don't know, people have like theme songs and shit, and I don't have that, so we're just cozy in my room, and my kitty's glaring at me because she's hungry, and she knows it's time for dinner, but she's a chunkster. You're fine! Well, it's time for dinner. My boyfriend's in the living room, so I'm gonna go eat, and I will see you next Wednesday at 6 o'clock Pacific time. Either step 2 or something else. I really don't know. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for support and all that good stuff. And I hope you have a great week and snuggle your pets for me. And I like memes, so send them to me. Okay. Now I gotta figure out how to stop this. Oh, and I'll post a link to my YouTube. Okay. Fancy outro right here. Where's the stream? Fucking. Oh, here. Okay, bye.